On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we speak with Tech Mahindra about using Cord to shape service delivery and reduce carrier capex and opex. Well, thanks for joining us in this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief at RCR Wireless News. Well, the ONOS project's central office re-architected as a data center platform has generated a lot of headlines over the past several months as telecom operators look to garner more efficiency from their virtualization deployments using SDN, NFV, and cloud technologies. The ONOS project earlier this year touted continued progress in its Cord efforts, including ongoing work towards the development of a new open reference implementation. The organization noted the Cord initiative is designed to provide economies of scale and agility of cloud computing to the telco's central office by leveraging infrastructure constructed from commodity building blocks using SDN, NFV, and cloud technologies. At the recent Open Network Summit, ONOS showcased various Cord use cases, including mobile Cord, which is said to integrate disaggregated and virtualized radio access network, evolved packet core, and mobile edge computing to target 5G technology moves. Further support for the initiative came from AT&T, which said it was trialing the Cord platform in a move to accelerate the rollout of its gigapower broadband service. For this week's featured interview, we spoke with Manish Singh, who's the VP of Product Management for SDN and NFV at Tech Mahindra, to discuss using Cord in shaping service delivery and reducing carrier capital and operating expense. Let's take a look at the interview now. Well, thanks for joining us this week. This week we are joined by Manish Singh, who's the VP of Product Management of SDN and NFV at Tech Mahindra, to talk a bit about the NFV and SDN space and also dig a bit more into the Cord environment as well. So Manish, thanks for joining us this week. Again, we appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Dan. Thanks for having us.
Very good, very good. Well, I know we spoke a few months back about kind of where we were in terms of the NFV and SDN space, and obviously it does seem like this industry is evolving rather rapidly. So hoping to maybe start off with you, just I guess what you've seen maybe over the past couple of months in terms of just a macro level development pace, what's kind of happened in the space, maybe what stuck out to you as being maybe some interesting insight or interesting developments that's happened across the space.
Yeah, no, I think so. There's definitely a lot of key progress I see that the industry continues to make in this space. I think looking at all the key service providers across the globe, I think we are seeing tremendous amount of activity and interest from them. So different service providers, of course, in different points in their own evolution. The visionaries are much further ahead in terms of really rolling out large number of, they call them the telco clouds, telco data centers, etc., and making very significant progress. On the other hand, others more setting up their certification labs and really dipping their toes. But across the board, I'd say seeing that. I think also we're seeing good progress being made on what I would call some big hurdles. One of the bigger hurdles was around orchestration, and I think that was a big challenge that everybody was struggling to really wrap their heads around and really get this orchestration piece well defined. And I think we're now seeing some real good initiatives coming around that. I mean, at ONS, we saw AT&T, obviously, they launched their the white paper of their own e-com architecture. But we are also seeing some key open source initiatives, in particular OSM, open source Nano, with the Telefonica and others leading that. We're seeing OpenO come out from Far East. So I think it's really good to see this activity level pick up, to really address this other big piece that was missing. And then last but not the least, I would say, tremendous activity in the open source, open innovation area, from OpenStack all the way to Core, where we've been working on. So
very good.
A lot of good progress.
Yeah, that's a good point. Obviously, the orchestration part of it was a big hurdle, and you're right. I remember I did a report around this time last year looking at kind of orchestration, and I remember talking to a lot of people, and that was just such a huge, not even just a hurdle, more of a headache. I mean, people were just so stressed out about what they're going to do with this, and it wasn't going anywhere. And it does seem like, you're right, over the past 6 months or so, a lot of initiatives have come out. It does seem like there's been a lot of progress, like you said, the AT&T stuff, Etsy working on their stuff as well. So yeah, good progress there, which is important because, end of the day, that's going to be very important for operators to be able to use those platforms to kind of integrate their legacy systems and the new systems and then kind of make it all work together. So that's going to be a big progress point there. So interesting.
Yeah, and also, I mean, bringing definitional, functional clarity around orchestration, because for a while it almost became a catch-all. So, anything and everything that wasn't finding a place in the architecture would just become like, yeah, the orchestration. So that created, quite a bit of, for lack of a better word, confusion around, what do we really want the orchestration in the NFV architecture to be doing, and what do we want the VNFs to be doing, what's the infrastructure doing, how do we see the BSS, OSS layers, what is their role, how are they going to evolve. So that's where I see tremendous progress now being made since we last talked. So.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, one thing I wanted to definitely touch base with you on a bit on was, I guess, the Cord initiative that's kind of come out more recently. Obviously, it seems like there's been a lot of talk about Cord. I know some operators have gotten behind this initiative. I guess maybe start off with what's, I guess, your overall view of, I guess, the development of Cord, maybe what the importance of it is, and I guess maybe where it's kind of gone since it's kind of, I know you guys have been working on it for a while now, but kind of where we are in terms of the development of Cord at this point.
Right. So I think, first of all, I should say, from a Tech Mahindra standpoint, right, we made a strategic decision to get meaningfully engaged in the Cord program. And we did so because we felt that there were some very key problems that the Cord program was really going after and really attacking them in a very structured way. In particular, really looking at key network functions and looking at, instead of having everything integrated, which is what the big iron old model was, how should we disaggregate the network functions? And once we start to disaggregate, what key functions should reside. So I think we felt that the overarching principle around disaggregation and the approach that the Cord was taking was key for the future of how the networks need to evolve. The other key piece then, given it's open, and we again as Tech Mahindra have wholeheartedly embraced open innovation, we are contributing to open innovation. And honestly, we do see that the networks of the future will leverage a lot more open source. So I think we felt that Cord was absolutely aligned to that other key strategic initiative that we as Tech Mahindra have been focusing. So that's why we engaged. And I think what we're seeing is, one of the programs within Cord now has evolved into multiple programs, right? Yeah. You have residential Cord, you have mobility Cord, you have analytic Cord, etc. So we started our engagement with the residential Cord, which was primarily targeted looking at CPE on the customer prem side and looking at OLT and the network functions in the central office to really start virtualizing them and disaggregating them, right? Mm-hmm. So we really started to engage on that particular program. And our key driving principles were, what does it really take to take all this great innovation that is happening in OnLabs, that's happening out of Cord program? What does it take to cross the chasm and bring all this great innovation out from the labs into deployment? Where are the gaps, and how can we help contribute in plugging those gaps and get this technology really deployed in the field?
Got it. I guess, and how's that progress come to this point? It does seem like, again, a lot of companies are involved in this, a lot of operators as well. Whenever you get a lot of people involved in things, sometimes there can be discussions that tend to kind of drag things out at times. I guess from your point of view, how has the progress come in terms of the evolution of Cord, whether, like you said, whether residential, M-Cord, all the various initiatives out there? How's the progress been so far?
So I think the residential Cord piece is definitely progressing very well. I mean, it's obviously on a trajectory to get rolled out in the network in a phased trial manner. But to do so, and I think this is this whole experience through this engagement that we gained really brought to light that while you have all this great innovation happening in the open source communities, and this cuts across the board. Cord is just an example here, but whether you take an OpenStack or you take ODL or what have you, to take that and to really get that implemented in the network, there are a number of key gaps that need to be plugged and addressed, because the most fundamental reason being there is no greenfield. There is an existing network out there. There is an existing infrastructure out there. So whatever you want to put in needs to interoperate, needs to interwork with the existing infrastructure, both on the network side as well as on the back, BSS, OSS, northbound infrastructure as well, that's already sitting out there. So this whole issues around hybrid network management, the issues around operationalizing in a hybrid environment while you have these virtualized network functions coming out. So you have an existing router, just to give you some examples. For example, you have existing routers sitting in the infrastructure of a service provider. And you want to put core in there, which has Quagga, which is leveraging vRouter, it has Quagga, but it needs to work with this existing router, might require protocol extensions to be put. So somebody needs to go and plug the gap. We took that burden on ourselves to really invest and say, yes, we are going to contribute to core. We are going to help plug these gaps, and we are doing that. Similarly, think of it, on the integration side. Once you start to bring in, it needs to be, as I said, northbound needs to be integrated with existing BSS infrastructure, with the existing OSS infrastructure as you start to, deploy it and operationalize the overall solution. And last but not the least, there is an extensive amount of work once you put this in the infrastructure that needs to go around testing. You have to test the individual solution, but test it end to end as you deploy it. So, again, testing, integration, development, plugging the gap, all these need to be done. And that's where we have, put our energies in to really make sure that core continues to make strategic progress.
It sounds like an easy process, really. Really, it should be a day or two. It should all be done, right? It's not much happening there, really.
Well, so yes, that's the end objective.
Sure.
I think that's where everybody wants to get to. Yeah. But along the way, being pragmatic and looking at the reality, there is heavy lifting that's involved to get the networks to migrate from where they are, which is primarily being the physical network function-led infrastructure to a VNF-led infrastructure. And by the way, this we continue to see across the board, right? We've seen this similar things like even with the OpenStack, for example, just taking that as an example, right? Work well in the enterprise and in the cloud, but to really adapt that for the telecom environment, there are a number of extensions, there are a number of capabilities that are needed. So it's just the nature of really taking those technologies and putting them in real networks, plugging the gaps, doing the integration, and getting them deployed.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I guess from an operator's perspective, what are some of the advantages that they can see or are maybe looking to get out of putting core into their systems? Obviously, I think we had to exchange some emails about potential capex, opex savings, maybe service delivery savings. I guess what's your kind of view on maybe what operators should see and maybe what they expect to see if they do implement core into somewhere into their systems?
So that's a great question. I think first and foremost, if you do core or core-like transformation for one network function or a small set of network functions, then you're not really going to get the real advantage. The real value comes is if you take the principles what core is really evangelizing, which is really, and it's trailblazing the transformation on the trajectories of disaggregation, on the trajectories of open innovation and more. If you take those principles and apply them to a broad swath of different network functions, then it will really start to transform the overall network. And what it will start doing is start delivering meaningful capex savings, because if you look at the core port, for example, it's primarily leveraging merchant silicon. It's built on COTS platforms. It's actually leveraging what's coming out of Open Compute Project to a very large extent. There are then, of course, from an IO termination perspective, say, for example, in case of a residential core, there are 1U MAC termination, OLT MAC termination pizza boxes, right? Again, leveraging merchant silicon. But all the other functions, for example, in case of OLT, they've been lifted out of that box, which otherwise was a bigger form factor and was all pre-integrated. They've been lifted out and put on what I'm characterizing as a core port, right? So you're really putting it all on a merchant. that starts to tremendously start driving capex savings. That starts to then make things much more easier to operationalize. But then if you also think from an overall architectural framework perspective, ability to add third-party network functions, third-party applications, and chain them along the way. That's inbuilt in the overall solution, right? So again, if we take a step back and look at the big picture, what it starts to clearly emerge is you have capex savings to be had. You start to, again, homogenize the overall infrastructure, but that you start to simplify the overall network, and that starts to yield the opex benefits just by overall transformation and simplifying, right? I mean, the overall processes and operations of the network. But then leads you to a point where you can start to look at micro-segmenting the market, to really start looking at generating net new revenue through new services and new services leveraging third-party applications and content. And that's, again, I think, what we find of tremendous value when we look at core. Last thing I'll say is, and I think this is where I started, doing it for, say, for example, just a residential piece. That's good. That's a great start, but is not going to yield the best result. And I think that's where the initiatives that CORD has really expanded itself to, for example, things like Mobility CORD, right? The M-CORD program and all. Now, the M-CORD program is looking at solving the problem for the mobile network, both on the access as well as on the core, applying the same principles of disaggregation, open innovation, and more, right? But then, if you look from an infrastructure perspective, and you start seeing the similarities, whether you're looking at a wireline access or wireless access, and that's where the real benefits of simplifying the infrastructure, transforming the infrastructure start to emerge.
Makes sense. So, I mean, it really seems like CORD is kind of almost, I mean, very much core to what operators are probably trying to do. And thus, as they move down this road towards virtualization, they should probably be thinking about having CORD as part of maybe their initial deployments. I'm guessing at some point you can maybe layer it in later, but it would seem to you get your most efficiencies out of this if as you move down this road, you kind of have CORD as part of your initial deployment or rollout plans. It sounds like, at least.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think the value that's coming out of CORD, that it's creating as a overall transformation, open source, open innovation-based transformation force, I think that is very, very meaningful. Okay. And I think to just draw a contrast and draw a parallel, the good news is we're seeing different approaches to this overall NFV transformation, right? Mm-hmm. On one hand, we see things like core, right, which is looking at a residential solution of how do you disaggregate and virtualize and create a solution. You're looking at mobile core, right? I mean, that's all in the core realm that's happening, looking at mobile access, mobile core. On the other end, we're seeing a different approach, say, for example, coming out of OPNFV, which is looking at, all the different upstream open innovation programs and how do you integrate that and create a more integrated solution that the service providers can adopt. So a more, if I may characterize, a more bottoms-up approach of take all the upstream innovation, integrate it, and create a solution. Whereas CORD, I would characterize it more as a top-down of looking at particular end network functions of, in case of mobility core, for example, you have the access in the core. What's the best architectural way I could deconstruct them and yet arrive at the same point where the network functions are virtualized, where I'm leveraging merchant silicon, where I'm leveraging COTS platform, where I'm achieving higher levels of automation, service agility, and more. So different approaches, coming from different open source programs to this NFV puzzle.
Well, I guess does that lead to a fear that again, another acronym being thrown out there that could maybe muddy the waters a bit in terms of this rollout towards NFV and SDN? Because it seems like every week there's a new initiative coming out, whether like the eComp one from AT&T or CORD or various different programs that are coming out, and they all seem like they're pretty important to the overall end game for what we're going for. But I guess is the fact that so many of these are coming out. And there are different ways to kind of go at these. Is there a fear that this might be causing confusion in the market for some operators who perhaps are not as advanced, or at least down the path as others are, that, maybe could be coming into it now and saying, hey, I want to get involved in this, but, there's so many things I need to worry about. And, I don't even know about virtualization as it is. And now I have to worry about cord and ecomp and, just all the different things that are coming out. Is there an issue with that becoming a problem at all for some operators out there in the space?
So I think I'd probably break that. It's a very good question. I'd probably break that into maybe two questions, right? I mean, when I think of, you mentioned things like ecomp or OSM or OpenO, etc. I put them in the bucket of, which is really more around how do we really achieve better levels of orchestration, better levels of service composition, service design, service agility overall in a network environment. Mm-hmm. And I think, as I said before, orchestration in itself was a bit of a catch-all, a missing piece that was not very well defined, at least in the first rounds of the HC architectural definitions. And I think it's great news for the industry that we're seeing now, even though different solutions, but we're seeing some good progress on each one of them that's happening. The other part that I would say is, to your broader question of, we're seeing all these different acronyms and different initiatives being thrown around. If you look at an SDN controller, you have Open Daylight on one end, you have ONOS on another, and more, right? So I think that's, to me, that's just the nature of the state of technology evolution. When I look at SDN NFV, we are really looking at a new blueprint of how the networks of tomorrow should be created. And when you're talking of a transformation of that magnitude, it is absolutely natural and prudent to expect and see what we're seeing, which is you will have different competing innovative solutions that will be put forward. And I think as an industry, we are churning through them. I would rather say we're seeing all this and we are at the right point. We don't want to stifle the innovation too quickly. We really want to see good competing architectures, good competing solutions. Just as I said, in case of SDN controller, there's merit in Open Daylight, there are merits in Open Control, there are merits coming out of ONOS, and I think it's absolutely prudent for us as an industry to work our way through it. I think over time, the best solutions are going to really gain the momentum and really start to gain the weight of market adoption, and rest will fall off the wayside. And as they follow the wayside, maybe the golden nuggets of them will get adopted into the mainstream solution that gets adopted. I mean, we've seen this in other form factors. We saw back in the day with OS when Linux started to gain momentum, and we've seen how well, for example, Linux has evolved and progressed over the decades, right? So I think same thing we should expect. And I would say, we're seeing a lot of this innovation that's happening, and I personally think it's a good thing. I think we need it. Sometimes it can get a little overwhelming. I think it'll sort itself out. And I think it's good to see all these different interesting architectures and solution approaches that are.
Yeah, well, it sounds like this is kind of the new normal, so it might as well get used to it at some point here. But also kind of leads to the fact that it really is important for operators, if they don't have enough internal resources to go down these roads, to partner with somebody who understands what needs to kind of happen and has a bigger picture view of what needs to be put in place. Because if you start going down one road and you forget something else, you have to backtrack a bit and do things. So it does sound like it's pretty important for operators to make sure that they've got getting either internal resources or partners in place to make all this to kind of go down this road and not get lost, I guess.
Dan, I can't agree more with you. And I think I'd say, from a Tech Mahindra standpoint, that's been our biggest driving principle as we've been investing in SDN NFV, which is how do we bring scale, how do we speed up this overall network transformation and do it in a way where we are truly vendor agnostic, vendor neutral, become the trusted partner for our service provider customers, and bring in the domain breadth, the understanding of all the different technologies, be it on the open source side or some of them coming from different vendors with proprietary solutions. But given the fact that we are vendor agnostic, vendor neutral, and not tied to a particular product P&L and not shackled to a particular product success, it gives us that very independent view on the technology evolution, on different approaches, and then really work in a consultative way to come up with the best solutions that will work for a given service provider need. And last thing I would say, there are a lot of these things happening, but at the end of the day, then you really need horses for courses, because most of the service provider networks are same, and you really need to look at what is the best solution approach for a service provider A versus B, and really that's where we as Tech Mahindra are targeting our energies to really engage with the service provider.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, I guess maybe one final question then for you. I guess looking ahead a bit in terms of core development and the continued rollout of core by operators, I guess what are maybe some of the hurdles or challenges you see maybe going forward, over the next 6 months or so in terms of, which things that might perhaps hinder or maybe trip up some of the progress that we're seeing so far along this initiative?
So I think the key thing really now is that we need to see adoption and deployment in the real network. I think from my vantage point, when I look at where things stand, it is absolutely critical to start seeing all of these things get deployed. We really need to cross the chasm from ideation to implementation, right? And I think that's where, if you ask me, is what I'd like to see. What hurdles do I see? The hurdles that I see are, great work, for example, is happening in the open source community. Yeah. They continue to do a lot of great work, great open innovation, coming up with great technologies. Yet their driving principles and objectives are, at times driven by the best new architecture, the best net new architecture that can be created. And that's great. but the other side of it is there is an existing network that's out there, right? And all this net new innovation, net new architecture needs to meet with that existing network and with that existing infrastructure. And that's where the hurdles lie. That's where, and it's all in the details, and those need to be addressed as we go through these migration. And I shared some examples with you, on integration testing, some development extensions and all, for example, in case of core, but that cuts across all different aspects. And I think that's the key hurdle that I expect us as an industry to be crossing in the next 6 months or so.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know whenever I talk to, either it's a vendor or an open source community, it does seem to be at times a certain disconnect between what they're trying to do in advancing technology and what operators kind of need at this point, because like you said, they have so many legacy systems in place. And while, they want to evolve these systems, they still have to support those systems. And so, as the new technology is rushing farther and farther ahead, it seems like what's out there now is falling farther and farther behind. That connection there is getting more and more tenuous, it seems like. And so, yeah, it would be nice. But again, operators also need to kind of get on board and start rolling these things out on a commercial basis, because, they can only really start advancing if they actually start putting this stuff out there. So it doesn't kind of go from both sides, really. But you're right, that disconnect is worrying. Hopefully that gets, somewhat resolved to an extent. But yeah, that's a great point. That's always seems like that's been an issue in the industry so far.
Absolutely. Looking forward to addressing a lot of that in the next 6 months.
Very good. Very good. Well, hey, Mish, we definitely appreciate the insight on this topic, obviously. And maybe what we'll do is we'll touch base again 6 months down the road. We'll revisit our issues that we touched about today, and we can kind of see what what kind of progress we made. But again, definitely appreciate the great insight today on the topic, and thanks for the time. And hopefully, like I said, we'll talk again soon. Well, thanks for watching this week's show, and make sure to check us out again next week when we are scheduled to speak with Sprint to discuss the carrier's plans for NFV and SDN and its 5G network moves.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.